I'm Billy S, welcome back to the channel. Today we're exploring Hyrule's dangerous wildlife as I rank every enemy from The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom from worst to best. Want more Zelda content? Check out my dungeon, bosses, and sage ability rankings for more content. There's a playlist link to my Zelda stuff down below in the description. So for my last foray into Tears of the Kingdom content, before my 2-month vacation to see my boyfriend, I wanted to take a look at the enemies you'd be fighting on the daily, because a common complaint from Breath of the Wild that I shared was a lack of overall enemy variety. You'd go to different locations, and it'd just be new flavors of the same small groups of enemies. Tears of the Kingdom definitely did better in this regard, but I still think they could have gone much further. I really miss the days where you'd have enemies specifically designed for a dungeon, an area, or a biome, but Tears of the Kingdom tried, and I accept and respect that. For the purposes of this video, I'll be ranking enemies via their species, so any elemental variations, or different colored variations, or gloom variations will all go under the same ranking. And I'd just like to shout out fellow content creator Rabid Luigi, who did this ranking idea first. It only makes sense to credit. But that's why I love ranking videos. We can all do the same topics, but potentially be completely different because we all have different opinions. So without further ado, all 23 enemies in Tears of the Kingdom ranked. And let me know your favorites in the comments. There are very few enemies I can say I truly dislike in the new Zelda games. After all, roaming the world and fighting enemies is part of the Zelda experience. But those enemies have to be visible. I'm not a fan of cowards, and I'm not a fan of Octoroks. During my recent Breath of the Wild playthrough to collect every Korok seed, these little balloon boys ruined my day constantly, firing at you from across the map with scary accuracy. It was little wonder that I found myself in a cold sweat when I realized Octo Forest in the Akala region was their home. However, in Tears of the Kingdom, these guys barely appeared. I genuinely can't remember a single memorable interaction I had with them. The footage you're seeing is likely either said Octo Forest footage, or something I had to go out of my way to record for you. Does anyone like these guys outside of their octo balloons? An item I woefully underuse. At least you can repair weapons if you have one you really like with the Death Mountain variant. Another enemy I think absolutely nothing of when I play these games, just what exactly is the point of the Pebblet? They're small variations on the large stone talus enemies who waddle towards you when you get close to their nests, and they try to recreate David versus Goliath, and we're the Goliath. Yet they're so simple to defeat. Just pick them up, chuck them, and they'll explode on contact with the ground. Sure, there are elemental versions like Fire and Frost Pebblets, but as long as you have elemental damage on hand to cool or heat each enemy respectively, you don't need to worry. Alternatively, just don't bother fighting them, you've got better things to do and so have I. They only miss out on my bottom spot for being insignificant, as opposed to downright irritating. Though if you were to ask me what I think the most annoying enemy type in the past 2 Zelda games was, my answer would be so quick, as I throw the Stal enemies under the bus and hope the wheels hit their heads. I have never been more annoyed than when I'm trying to solve a Korok puzzle in Breath of the Wild, and suddenly 3 of these guys pop out of the ground to annoy me. In Tears of the Kingdom, while they less frequently bothered me in my travels above, they instead seemingly stalk me through the depths, appearing as I'm just trying to light my way to another light route. And just like in Breath of the Wild, I can't be bothered fighting them. Just give me an actual Bokoblin, Moblin, and Lizalfos, and stop attacking me with these fragile, bony boys. The one thing they brought back from Ocarina of Time's Hyrule Field, and look, if I had a time machine, I know what I'd be changing by going back in time. Next up, the first of the new enemy types in Tears of the Kingdom, we have the Little Froxes. These guys are adorable. They can leap at you with a little jump that more often than not misses me, and seeing them does give you that sensation of, what are you? Had I made the connection, I might have realized these guys were hinting at the existence of their big brothers and sisters around the depths who are significantly less adorable. Despite dying in one hit, they do drop Zonite upon defeat, which is nice. It doesn't go a long way, but farming for Zonite ore is fairly tedious in my opinion, so getting any extra leg up is a +1 for me. When I first saw an Aracuda in the game, I was excited. An entirely new flying enemy to fill out the roster of opponents in the Sky Islands, as well as being a transport method for bokoblins on the ground level. I was hoping these guys would maybe have elemental variations and be a decent threat, but that was not the case, as they die in one hit. For something so large, you wouldn't expect the Aracuda to be so fragile, and that's a real shame because they absolutely had the potential to be so much more than just a large version of Keese, but without the good material drops. I do like that they can attack you as you're traveling to different Sky Islands though. When you're piloting a plane and you don't have your Yonobo cannonball, they can actually be a little dangerous. I'm proud. If I could just take a few moments of your time, I'm trying to reach 10,000 subscribers by the end of 2023. I don't know if we can do it, but I'd love to try. Look at how many of my viewers aren't subscribed. Let's rectify that. Be sure to parry that subscribe button so you can stay up to date on my weekly content. Back to the video. I have such a soft spot when it comes to the choo-choos. The most basic of elemental enemy types, they come in a variety of different flavors, all of which are forbidden to consume, and aren't terribly strong out of the gate. Though their elemental versions, the Fire, Thunder, and Frost choo-choos, are useful in large groups, as their defeat will cause them to explode in their respective element, doing AoE damage to whatever's around them. Pretty cool. Their main utility, though, is their choo-choo jelly, which can be quickly attached to arrows to create some good elemental damage. If you're running low on fire seeds, pop out some choo-choo jelly and put it near a campfire to make it orange and flammable. Not a tough enemy, but they certainly have their usefulness with their materials. Speaking of useful materials, shall we discuss Keese? These one-eyed bats will die in one hit from any attack, and the normal variant is pretty straightforward. I've had a few run-ins with the elemental variations before that have ended less than stellar for me in the past. Frozen by a Frost Keese, electrocuted and forced to drop all my gear from a Thunder Keese, that sort of thing. Their utility, though, in Tears of the Kingdom comes in the form of their eyeballs and their elemental versions, because if you attach a Keese eyeball to an arrow, it becomes a homing arrow. And let me tell you, use the right elemental arrows on a Gleeok, and you'll be having a goddamn field day destroying them. Having an attack that 9 times out of 10 is guaranteed to hit your opponent is bloody brilliant, and that boosts Keese up in my list, where in Breath of the Wild, they'd probably be right at the bottom. Oh boy, my first hot take of the video, I have never been a fan of Moblins. The larger variation of the bokoblin and one of the 3 main enemy types in the game, I don't know, they just don't appeal to me as an enemy. I can see them in the distance and just think, I don't want to fight you. They're large and in charge, can often hit you from further away with their large weapons and long reach, but at the same time, I find myself having an easier time with them than the other 2 main enemies. In Tears of the Kingdom, they at least have better materials to fuse onto weapons, but once you're in the endgame and killing Lionels and Silver Bokoblins and Lizalfos, Moblins just feel less interesting to fight. If you decide to wander the depths for long enough, it won't take long for you to come into contact with the Yiga clan, and more importantly, the Yiga foot soldiers. These basic enemies are just there to annoy you really, and they haven't changed since Breath of the Wild. They teleport around, firing their arrows and hanging in the air. They might do a cool dash forward slice attack to strike Link down, but ultimately their health is pretty low. And they're more entertaining for their pre-fight antics than their actual fights themselves. A great source of potassium though. If you're not interested in moving to Farron to get those mighty bananas, Koga's besties will get them for you. I'm still not 100% sure how I feel about the redesign of the Gibdos. I think the bug-like quality they've been given is genuinely harrowing as someone who isn't a fan of bugs myself, and the way they're birthed from these glowing mushrooms is setting off a fear I didn't know I had. And finding them attacking you in the sand swell for the first time as you try to approach Gerudo Town is one of the most intimidating moments of a first playthrough, as you have no idea what these creatures are capable of and your physical attacks do nary a scratch. But with Rejuice Sage ability or any elemental attack, they become a joke, going down pretty much immediately. I guess I was expecting the classic Redead style Gibdos with the piercing scream and the Link frozen in fear as they slowly approach. They still slowly approach, but since you can move, it's not that intimidating. Unless it's one of the crawling ones though. I knew I didn't want to sleep tonight. Ugh. Deep in the caverns of Hyrule and the depths below, it won't take you long to run into Horriblins, gorilla-like creatures who hang from the ceiling and attack you if you try to come close. I haven't had a terrible amount of experience dealing with these guys, as I'd often try to kill them as quickly as possible, or just skip past them because they feel like a less dangerous threat and more like a nuisance that I want to swat away. The group in the depths before the Fire Temple are the ones I can really picture when I think of these enemies, as in large batches, they can be dangerous and will really gang up on Link. I do love that they have colored variations like the regular trio of enemies, making them more dangerous as the game goes on. But they look so goofy, I could never be afraid of them, and I don't think they're horrible like their name suggests. I think they've been mistreated. Petition to change their name to Mistreatablin? Wait. You can't go wrong with vanilla ice cream in the same way you can't go wrong in Zelda with a Bokoblin. The basic enemy type for the last two Zelda games, these little critters have so much personality baked into them, from the way they scamper around terrorizing wildlife, to the way they sometimes just relax and chill at their camps before you come in to murder them. They're absolutely precious babies, and if I had more disposable income, I'd certainly get a plushie of one of them for my collection. I find myself dying more to Bokoblins than any other enemy in the game, because they're so good at ganging up on you. Shout out to the Lurelin Village variants. And if you're facing a black or silver Bokoblin, you know you're in for a tough time. As they swing fast, they can have any type of weapon, and their HP just gets larger and larger. They're the baseline for a good Zelda enemy, and I don't want them going away anytime soon. That being said, of the three basic enemy types, Lizalfos have always been my favorite. Maybe it's because I'm just a sucker for lizards and scaled animals in my daily life, but these bug-eyed, camouflagey boys just make me smile when I see them. They're so goofy and also filled with personality. The way they leap out at you out of hiding with their little legs shaking in the air as they most likely sail over your head. In actual combat though, they're the most dangerous of the main three. Not only do they have a rather frantic movement pattern that makes keeping up with them very difficult, especially as they love to maintain distance, but they also have their long-range spit ability that has devastated me many a time. Then add the elemental variations of these enemies, and yeah, you've got a difficult time ahead of you. I'll often one-shot the fire and frost versions with their opposing element because I know how threatening they can be if you give them an inch. They'll take a mile. You may notice that a majority of my top 10 contain new enemies from Tears of the Kingdom, because I wanted to highlight some of the really cool decisions the Zelda team made in regards to the new bestiary. And nothing is more of a highlight than the Evermeans. Nobody, and I mean nobody, could have predicted living trees were coming to get you. I first discovered these guys while helping Hestu out on my way to Rito Village, and the visual of a giant tree running towards me is the stuff of nightmares. You can defeat them with an axe or a sharp sword, and I admittedly haven't encountered them all that much in my playthrough since. But that arguably makes it better, because I never know when a tree is going to come to life and give me a mini heart attack, even if these enemies aren't killing me anytime soon. More of this, Nintendo, por favor. You do not understand the sheer level of excitement I had when I found a like for the first time in those opening Sky Island caverns. These enemies that once swallowed your shield in past games have now become a far more versatile and terrifying enemy to run into if you're not prepared. They stick to the walls of caves and will try to attack you if you get close. The normal variation is easy, just hit the weak spot that appears as you approach and go nuts, but the elemental versions are a different story. I especially like the rock-like who can shoot boulders at you. I discovered one very early on in my playthrough, and when it one-shot me, I couldn't help but laugh. And clearly Nintendo loved this enemy enough as they made the sludge-like boss in the Zora quest line, which confirms that yes, they do have feet. This isn't a Diglett situation, thank God. We're jumping back to the Yiga clan now to take a look at the Blade Masters. These larger ninjas are far more powerful than their foot soldier counterparts, utilizing their strong blades and their special Earthquake ability to distract and stagger Link so they can go in for the kill. They're pretty tanky as far as enemies go, often pairing up with the foot soldiers to make for a terrifying combination, as they hit very hard, so you have to play very carefully when fighting them. They're not as bad as their Breath of the Wild Yiga hideout counterparts who could one-shot you if you were discovered, but I always have to focus when a Blade Master joins the fray. Or you can befriend them and actually learn their Earthquake ability in the Yiga clan hideout as long as you have the Yiga clan set, which I think is very cool. New besties! The most threatening version of the Gibdos, the Moth Gibdo, is just different enough from the regular variation that I actually wanted to rank them separately. Because these guys have everything. Movement? Check. Scary appearance that had me doing a double take my first time seeing one? Check. Acid spray? Oh god. Their ranged ability, tied with their ability to fly, makes them very dangerous. And nowhere was that clearer for me than in the Queen Gibdo boss rematches in the depths, where they'd be quite a few of them spawning as I'm trying to destroy the Gibdo mushrooms, and they can be quite the hassle. Such a cool design, you can see they're the halfway between a normal Gibdo and the Queen Gibdo. Kichachi. If you had to ask me whether I prefer soldier constructs or guardian scouts, there's no competition. The soldier constructs of Tears of the Kingdom are leagues better, having 4 different variations that scale as you progress throughout the game, similar to the regular enemy types. But what I love about soldier constructs, though, is their usage in the various combat shrines where Link is stripped of his gear, and they suddenly become the most dangerous creatures in the world. One false move, and they can tear off a large portion of Link's health bar. But their materials are great, especially when fused with other Zonai weaponry. They're versatile, they have a really sleek robotic design, and they're far more complex than the Breath of the Wild Guardian Scouts. Huzzah! This may come as a surprise, but I absolutely adore the new variation of the Wizrobe enemies. These elemental magicians use their rods to roast, freeze, and zap the competition, all the while dancing through the skies with the type of style I wish I could exude. Their giggly voices belay a rather disturbing desire to destroy, and if you've seen their concept art, you'll see the horrifying mouth and glowing eyes beneath those cloaks. These feel like the type of enemies you'd put in one of those terrifying kids' stories about children being kidnapped by big bad monsters so your kids would behave at bedtime. And both my commenters and many people on the internet have pointed out that the weapons they drop can be diffused at Tarrytown to collect some extra ore. Is it worth it? That's up to you. But what I do know is that Wizrobe in the concept art has a limp wrist. Is he, you know? Yeah, I'm gonna be honest when I say that when I see a boss bokoblin in the wild, I often run the other way, because I keep running into black variants, and they're too hard. But when I fought these guys, I thought they were an ingenious way of making bokoblins more difficult. They act as commanders, telling their soldiers what to do, who to attack, and they won't hesitate to get their hands dirty if things really aren't going their way. Though in that sense they're also not difficult, because the challenge comes from their army, and once you've taken out all of their foot soldiers, all that's left is a chunky yet funky, large and in charge, boss bokoblin, who can be easily dodged and whittled down. The Hyrule field camp surrounding the Skyview Tower is still the best usage of this enemy type bar none, and a great introduction to the boss bokoblin concept. Taking the bronze in today's ranking, we have the Gloom Hands. These creatures of gloom and malice will rise from the ground at seemingly random intervals throughout the world, and you'll only know when the sky turns red and the world becomes more threatening. I love the fear and adrenaline that comes with these guys, and I've seen some hilarious clips on Twitter of people attempting to hide from them like they're in a horror movie. but I have to admit, actually fighting them is a little annoying. They can grab you very easily, and I found myself getting stun-locked into grab after grab when fighting them. They're at their best in open areas where you have space to plan around them, not so in closed-off locations like the Great Deku Tree or Makar Island. I also really dislike that they can respawn if you take too long, but even with those caveats, they're such a unique and terrifying experience, they were always going to take a top spot on this list. Obtaining our silver medal, the harder variation of the soldier construct, the captain construct, is my favorite new enemy in Tears of the Kingdom, because these guys are walking tanks. Not only do they come equipped with bows and a very high damage output, so anytime you approach you're risking death by just being visible, but they are the only enemy with the capability to use the fuse power. Maybe you'll run into them fusing rockets to arrows on a sky island as they try to shoot you. Or maybe you'll run into them in a shrine with some terrifying Zonai tech attached to their arms. The possibilities are endless depending on where they end up, and they scale just like the soldier constructs, meaning as you progress through the game and get stronger, so will they. Just writing this script, I actually want to go and fight more of them, what the heck? But taking the gold medal, there was no other option in my mind. I am just so enamored with the Lionels of modern Zelda. While a part of me was hoping we'd get a new enemy to one-up the Lionels in terms of their impact on the world, and no, the Gleeoks don't count because they're bosses, not enemies, I'm glad that Lionels remain as terrifying as they were on day one. Now, admittedly, if you've played Breath of the Wild, you likely know how to fight a Lionel or two because they can be vulnerable to flurry rushes, headshots, and you can mount them. The main danger in Tears of the Kingdom is how they've all been moved to different locations. So the first thing I did was check the old Lionel spots to see if any still remained. If you want true fear though, just hop into the depths underneath the Colosseum of Hyrule. You don't know what it means to face an unstoppable force until you see a fully clad in armor Lionel with a giant mace with a spiked ball attached to the tip who uses gloom. You better have ancient arrows. And that's my list of the Zelda Tears of the Kingdom enemies. You can also apply this to Breath of the Wild and the list would be mostly the same, except Keese would be lower on the list. Just Guardian Scouts would be middle of the pack before Bokoblins because I don't really like them, and actual Guardians would be my number 2 because I love Guardians. So thank you for watching, please be sure to parry that subscribe button so you can stay up to date on all of my weekly content, and thanks! My socials are on screen now, feel free to follow where you feel comfortable. I recommend my Twitter, it's really my only active social. And a massive shout out to my patrons over on Patreon for supporting me for yet another month. You guys are awesome, you're keeping my channel alive, and I am so grateful. See you guys next time. Adios.